The Soldiers of Ares. Chapter 20. Lord Hephaestus had finally shown himself. Maximus had seen many gods on television and in pictures. He had also met Hermes in person, so he wasn't sure what the smith god would look like, but this was definitely not what he had expected. He was big, and by big he meant bigger than Rex and Ajax. He had thick brown hair and a beard that was so overgrown and untidy that you couldn't really tell where the hair ended and the beard began. His eyes were the color of copper, and he had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept for days. Also, one side of his face looked like it had been hit by a truck. He even had a few teeth missing. No wonder I have never seen Hephaestus on television before, Maximus thought. He definitely had a face for the radio. There was even a screw stuck in his beard. Below his neck he had a huge barrel chest with a lot of chest hair protruding out. His hands were so big they could easily have squashed Maximus like a bug. He was wearing nothing but a sleeveless white undershirt, and it was so covered in grease and muck that its original color was barely visible. He also had a huge hammer in his hand that was bigger than Maximus. He was also wearing a large bronze machine on his back that made it look like he was wearing a backpack. But the real surprise was from his waist down. He had no legs. Instead, he came rolling in on tread wheels, the kind he had seen only on tanks. He was connected to these wheels and other gears and equipment from where his legs should have been. Maximus thought he looked like a centaur, only instead of being half horse, he was half tank. Hephaestus rolled in on his wheels. Maximus remembered Ajax saying that the smith god liked machines more than living things. That was understandable, since he was more than half machine himself. I've told you 1,000,000 times not to move around the castle on your wheels, boss. It makes the floor dirty and you sometimes end up crushing furniture, Ajax said. Hephaestus looked down at his feet, or wheels in this case, and he said, "Oh, I forgot I had them on again. Just a second, I'll change now." He closed his eyes and concentrated for a second. Suddenly his wheels began to transform. The wheels and metals around it also began to change place, and within a few seconds, instead of wheels, Hephaestus was standing with a big pair of bionic legs made of bronze and metal. Maximus could tell how tall he really was now, and he was nearly 10 feet tall. He was even taller than Lord Ares. "It seems you have made some improvement to your feet, old friend," Daedalus said. Hephaestus walked forward to greet Daedalus. He was using his hammer like a cane. "It's so nice to see you active again, instead of just staring off into space," Hephaestus said. Daedalus chuckled and said, "Yes, it seems one of my own experiments has caused me a hindrance again. And it's definitely not the first time. And if I know you, it won't be your last," Hephaestus said. "You're one to talk. If I recall correctly, you have had quite a few backfires from your works as well. Remember the whole Iron Giant Talos incident?" Hephaestus laughed loudly at this, and it made their chairs shake. "Lucky I encrypted a deactivation module in the processors of its foot, or I would have never heard the end of it. I hope you learned your lesson with artificial intelligence and function encoding with that. At least now you sustain a termination program within all your automatons," Daedalus said. They continued to talk like this for a while, using words which Maximus didn't completely understand. He was pretty sure a few of the words weren't even in the same language. After a while, Daedalus turned to them and said, "It seems I must turn in for the night. I only have 1 minute left on my clock. And speaking of clocks, did you manage to get me a watch, Achilles?" Achilles nodded and took something out of his pocket. It was one of those old pocket watches, complete with a chain and everything. "Here, I got you this since I knew you loved collecting old technology," Achilles said. "I also got a wristwatch for myself so that I can keep in check of your timings." Daedalus took the pocket watch happily. It looked like someone had given him an early birthday present. "You know me too well, my friend," Daedalus said. Then he turned to Hephaestus and said, "Well, it seems like I must take leave now, but we'll catch up again tomorrow. Please have one of your automatons escort me back to my room and bring me some dinner there." Daedalus just had enough time to wish the rest of them a good night before he turned into his mumbling self, and then Hephaestus had one of the butler bots escort him back to his room. "Great man Daedalus, one of the greatest minds I have ever met," Hephaestus said. He then turned to the rest of them and said, "Who the heck are you people?" Ajax sighed and said, "I already told you about them. They're the crew that rescued Daedalus from Ares. Plus, you promised to behave better when we had guests." Hephaestus scratched his beard and he finally found the screw that was stuck in it. He threw it on the ground and one of the butler bots cleaned it up immediately. "I suppose I did agree to that," Hephaestus grumbled. Then his eyes lit up and he said, "That means one of you is Achilles." Achilles stepped up and said, "That would be me, sir." Hephaestus sized him up. "So you're the great warrior everyone talks about. Ajax had already told me you weren't really dead. Clever move, though. By the way, your mother was an old friend of mine." In fact, she made me make some armor for you during the Trojan War. Now don't tell me you lost it." Maximus knew he was referring to the armor of sticks. He hadn't lost it, of course, but he seemed to have left it in his room for dinner, Maximus thought, but he still had his sword, though. Just then, Achilles put his hand in his t-shirt and took out a chain he was wearing around his neck. In the place of the chain where the locket would have been was a summoning crystal. He tapped it, and in a flash of light, Achilles was wearing the armor of sticks. Hephaestus seemed delighted to see his old work. "Yes, this truly is the greatest armor I have created. I never had such amazing materials to work with either. I still don't know how your mother managed to get her hands on the black metal from the sticks." He checked to see if the armor had any scratches or nicks on it, and he found nothing. "Well, this really is the invulnerable armor," Hephaestus said. "A pity I ran out of the rare metal to complete the armor, and I see you had to pay dearly for that." Maximus knew the story. It was a famous one. The invulnerable armor of sticks had covered Achilles from head to toe except at one point at his heel. It was the only point in his body that was vulnerable, but no one was able to hit him there during the entire war, not even the great Hector. But at the end of the war, Hector's brother Paris made the most amazing shot in history. With a poisonous arrow, he managed to hit Achilles right in the heel. The poison had supposedly killed Achilles, but Maximus knew now that this wasn't the case. But this incident had coined the term Achilles' heel, and it meant something's weak spot. "You know, I always wondered this. I have met that runt called Paris who supposedly made that amazing shot. He's the champion of Venus now, but he really didn't seem like the type to even lift a bow without shaking with fear, much less shoot with such precision in the heat of battle," Hephaestus said, narrowing his eyes, almost certain that something was amiss. Achilles nodded to this and said, "That's because he didn't. The one who actually made that shot was Apollo." Hephaestus began laughing and shouted, "I knew it!" But the news caught everyone else by surprise. Even Ajax asked, "What? Why didn't you tell me?" Achilles just lowered his head and said, "What difference did it make? By the time I woke up again, the war was over and we had won. That was what was important." Hector glided in between everyone and raised his arms and said, "All right, now wait just a cotton-picking minute here. My history may be a little rusty, but didn't Emperor Zeus forbid any of the gods from directly entering the war? This was true, of course, to make sure that the Trojan War did not turn into a world war. Emperor Zeus had forbidden any of the gods from directly entering battle. But they were free to support the side they chose in any other form they chose. When no one corrected Hector, he then asked, "Then why didn't Lord Zeus punish Apollo for what he did?" "Maybe he just didn't know," Achilles said. "Apollo had made sure that Paris got the credit for killing me in order to mask his involvement in the war. Maybe like everyone else, Lord Zeus believed this as well." This made sense to Maximus, but then Hephaestus said, "You would be surprised what Zeus would let Apollo get away with. After all, he and his sister Artemis have always been Zeus's favorites." "So wait, how did you survive the poison then?" Rex asked. "Well, after I got shot, a few members of the Omega-7, including Ajax here, found me and rushed me to my old master Chiron and Daedalus. The two of them managed to prevent the poison from killing me, but my leg was too damaged by then and they had to amputate it. It was almost a month before I regained consciousness, and by then the world already thought I was dead." Silence followed what Achilles had just said, and finally Hephaestus asked, "So was it Daedalus who fitted you with a bionic leg?" And Achilles nodded yes to this. That probably was not the question Maximus would have went with, but he wasn't a god, so what did he know? "And I also recall a nice shield I had built to go with the armor. You didn't lose it, did you?" the god asked. Achilles showed him his left gauntlet. It had a blue crystal on it, and Maximus realized it was another summoning crystal. "Excellent," Hephaestus said. Maximus wanted to know more about what happened during the Trojan War, but just then the doors swung open, and around 5 butler bots came in with trays of food. Their dinner was finally here. On seeing the food that arrived, everything else was wiped clean out of Max's mind. He thought the breakfast here was too good to be true. But this was something else. He didn't know where to begin. Right in the middle of the table was a huge, fully cooked wild boar. The entire thing was covered in gravy, and it had an apple in its mouth. Next to that were sizzling plates of kebabs made from every meat imaginable, like chicken, beef, mutton, and even moose. There were 2 fully stuffed turkeys on both sides, and a big hot plate of large chicken drumsticks. Maximus thought that the chickens must have been on steroids because each leg was bigger than his arm. There was also a spicy duck pot roast and a literal mountain of sausages on another plate. There was also a large cylinder of spinach soup. "I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you guys are not vegetarians," Hector said. "What gave it away?" Maximus said with a grin. "Nonsense," Ajax said. "We have green food. Here looks spinach soup." The soup was definitely green, but it looked a lot like barf. Maximus was glad when Achilles decided to put the lid back on it. They started to dig in, and everything was delicious. The spinach soup sat there forgotten. Even Hephaestus had eased up a little more once he had some drinks in him. He was drinking huge jugs of cold beer, but it really didn't seem to get him drunk. You know, I always wondered why it was okay for minotaurs to eat beef, Hedger said. The same reason why it's okay for you to eat birds. We are nowhere near the same species. We just look alike. So shut up and eat your chicken, Rex said. Well, at least you admitted you look like a cow, Hedger snickered. Hephaestus took a large bite from a turkey leg and said, okay, so I know who Achilles is, but who the heck are you guys? Are you soldiers from Athens? They all looked at each other, and then they explained how they had helped with rescuing Daedalus. Hephaestus heard the story and said, Martian soldiers helping out Athena, well, that's a first. I can understand how that would put you on Ares' bad side. He took another bite and asked, so, you guys are refugees with no country now, huh? The three of them nodded in agreement. And you too are ex-soldiers. So what happened to that job? Hephaestus asked next. Well, Max here quit the first chance he got. And, well, I got thrown out after my injury, Rex said, looking down. Maximus knew he was not comfortable talking about this, but Hephaestus gave an understanding nod and said, the world is not kind to you when you're crippled. I know that personally from experience. But thankfully, there was nothing wrong with my brain, and I was able to build my own limbs. He was referring to his mechanical legs, of course. Rex just grunted in agreement. Hephaestus started scratching his beard in deep thought, and finally he said Rex was it. You don't seem like a bad guy, so how about I fix you up with some metal limbs? Rex's eyes widened, and he clearly couldn't believe what he was hearing. He slowly said, but I don't have that kind of money. Oh, don't talk nonsense, dear lad. I got plenty of money. I'll do this for you free, Hephaestus said, taking another huge sip from his jug. And don't think I'm doing this out of pity either. I love working on bionic limbs. They're so complex and a real challenge, and I love a good challenge. Yours should be really interesting since I've never worked on a minotaur before. So what do you say, you in? Rex just stood there so dumbstruck he couldn't say a word, but luckily Hedger helped him out and said, I'm sure if he hadn't just swallowed his tongue now from all the excitement, he would have said yes, and thanked you 1,000,000 times. And Rex nodded to this. Excellent. It looks like I got myself a new project, Hephaestus said, and he sounded like a child who just got a new toy. He then turned to Ajax and asked, when are they leaving? In about a week's time, I guess, Ajax answered. That's even better. A deadline should really help me work more efficiently, and it amps up the challenge. Have all of his things shifted to one of my labs. Use Lab 3. Hephaestus then turned to Rex and said, a week is a real challenge, so you'll be staying in one of my labs the whole time, since we have no time to waste. And don't worry, I'm going to make you the best bionic arm and eye you have ever seen, and maybe even fit something on your horn if we have the time. He started walking away. Come on now, let's start right away. I'm going to get this done in a week even if it kills you, he said, sounding real excited. He's joking, of course? Rex asked Ajax. Of course he is. I mean, a few of his guinea pigs have died before in his experiments, but I'm sure that won't happen to you, Ajax said with a sheepish smile. On that reassuring note, Rex followed the smith god out the door. After they had left, Hedger began to yawn and said, well, that was an exciting dinner, but I think I'm going to hit the sack now. Everyone agreed, and they all got up to head for bed. Before Maximus went into his room, Achilles stopped him and said, try to go directly to sleep. I'll come and call you early in the morning for your first training session. Maximus agreed to this and went inside. He fell straight onto his bed when he entered his room, and it only took a few minutes before he was fast asleep. This has been a chapter from Book 1 of the new World Odyssey series, The Soldiers of Ares. Links to the books in the bio. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next chapter.